Hello, China Young, Managing Director of Winding Road Theater Ensemble here. And I'm very excited today to be joined by the playwright for our upcoming production of Miss American Pie, Gwen Rice. Hello, Gwen.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Could you tell us just a little bit about yourself? How do you identify as an artist and kind of how
Mhm.
long has that trajectory been through your life?
I started out my creative life as an actress and was very into, all the plays and musicals and things when I was in high school. And even before that, I have a theater and English degree from the University of Iowa. And when I got to college, I was still really interested in acting, but I had always had this sort of writing passion as well. And before college, I had written quite a few short stories. And those two worlds were pretty separate of sort of theater and writing. And when I was in my early 20s, I think I realized that my favorite part about writing the stories was actually writing the dialogue, and that being in theater already and um, knowing what kind of plays I wanted to see on stage, what kind of parts I wanted to play, that I realized that, playwriting was actually a huge opportunity for me to sort of create stories sort of from the ground up. So I've been writing plays off and on, I guess, ever since I was, in my early 20s. I'm a professional writer, and I've done a whole bunch of corporate gigs. I've also worked in a lot of nonprofit organizations, and right now I'm also a theater critic. So that's just a whole lot of writing and theater and sort of being an advocate for the performing arts.
That's awesome. You mentioned that you kind of started to think about roles that you might want to perform. So, do you find that you write from the perspective of like, I'm going to write a role for me, or do you also write stories that just you would never be able to play? How is that relationship with your writing?
Lots of those things. I tend to like women's stories. I'm a pretty staunch feminist, and I'm always again trying to advocate for more women's voices behind the scenes, directing, obviously, playwriting, more really interesting roles for women on stage. It hasn't been that long that the world of playwriting wasn't just sort of the area for old white guys. It's just been really recently that other voices are sort of joining that choir, thank goodness. And women's voices hugely important to me. Obviously, people of color, people from all different backgrounds. There are lots of stories to tell. Um, but yeah, it's funny. I often, sort of imagine myself as the spunky heroine, if I have a story that has one of those. And I normally write one person in a play who I personally sort of fall in love with over the course of writing. So yeah, pretty personal. I have not written a part for myself until I wrote this play, actually, Miss American Pie. Um, I had been writing plays for much bigger casts, for like 7 or 8 or 9 cast members, and I was sending them out to a lot of theaters and getting the answer, well, in these tough economic times, we just can't afford to have that many people on stage. We can't afford to pay that many actors. Can we find something smaller? I wrote a 3-person play and was pretty happy with that. And it got some recognition, but it still didn't get a production. And I thought, well, fine. I'm going to write a 1-person play and I'm going to perform it in my own kitchen. And, gatekeepers be damned. And and it was sort of my own little rant, and then kind of much to my surprise, that's exactly what happened. The first production of Miss American Pie, I was actually the main character in my 1-person show. Like I said, I didn't think that was really going to happen, but it did.
Yeah. So did you write the character originally in the script we have and that we're producing, the character that tells the story, her name is Maggie. Did you originally have that as the name or was the original name Gwen?
But no, the original name was always Maggie
Okay,
because she is not me.
got it.
Uh, and the play is based in part on, lots of things that I have experienced, lots of things that people that I've met. It's based in large part actually on a friendship that I had with a Pakistani woman, and she was a photographer working for the newspaper here in Madison. And I was a food reviewer at the time, and so we would go out to different restaurants and photograph food and talk about it. And we got to be really good friends. And so that friendship is very much part of the story of Miss American Pie. And then I personally love to bake. I'm sort of known as kind of the pie girl. And so when I was thinking about writing a one-person play originally, I had read an article in the New York Times about a play that was being done in people's apartments. Cooking was a large part of it, and just storytelling, and just one person who was making a meal in an actual kitchen for a very small audience. And telling this amazing story at the same time. And I thought, well, I want to do something like that. I'm crazy about food. And and what a cool thing to have this sort of non-traditional theater space and use that, which really breaks down a lot of the barriers, into getting like a production in the theater, etc.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had this idea that I wanted to have a one-woman show about making an apple pie, and that's actually where the play started. And then it was, figuring out, well, what's interesting about that, and what other stories can I kind of layer on top of that, and what's going to make this compelling and more than just a cooking lesson. So
Right, right. That's so interesting. And so for our audiences, we were going to be presenting this in a theater space. And we were going
and
to
I was
build,
so excited to see it actually in a real theater,
yeah,
and see how that experience was going to be different. But
I know
next year.
things happen, but I think it's also something that's interesting about how we are able to transition it to the online version, because our leading actress Denise Blum, and she's also an ensemble member, so shout out to Denise. She has been working really hard, and we are going to end up filming this in her kitchen. So fortunately, she's got a fabulous kitchen, and she also is a baker of sorts, and she has been practicing making pie in her own kitchen. So, what better way to do the show rather than transplant her from her own kitchen to a stage kitchen? She gets to just do it the way she knows how, and in her own space, her using her own utensils. And it also, really allows us to actualize the production in the way you initially envisioned it, in this kind of different venue and atmosphere. And I think there's still like a serendipitous effect of, well, now it still gets to be what it originally was. And so I think
Right.
there's something to that too.
So for the full experience, I would recommend to your audiences that they either buy or make their own pie and then just put it in the oven at the beginning of the show, so that as they can smell it baking and everything, they can, the show is sort of moving them along, and then by the time the show is over, the pie should be done. So I mean, it's a whole sensory,
That's amazing.
exploration. But yeah, I was disappointed that you're going to move it online. I was really grateful that you didn't just say, well, we're not going to do this after all. And like you said, it's actually a pretty malleable kind of show, in that I think it actually works in a lot of different settings. It was interesting to watch people. I actually performed the show in a couple of people's own home. So I came to their house,
Mhm.
and they invited like 10 friends over, and I did it in their kitchen. Um, and I think that was really interesting for people to have sort of theater literally come to them. And then, like you said, it was cool to have my friends come over to my house, and like you said, I know where everything is, I know how my oven works. And it was a really interesting experience having theater in my house as well. So
Yeah, and we actually toyed with the idea originally of doing it in a house setting. We didn't know anyone with a giant enough kitchen attached to a giant enough living space for people to gather. And also, COVID, don't want to bring people into other people's houses.
Right.
And then we also started wondering if there were commercial kitchens that we might be able to do something in. But that's perhaps for a future production of it where things feel safer for people to
Right.
gather inside. So because our audiences can buy the video on demand version of this show, what that allows them to do is as soon as they hit play on the link that they follow when they purchase their ticket, the show starts, and then they have 48 hours to finish that production. Now, what we have learned, that I'm going to just go ahead and give a secret away, is that actually an individual that has a ticket link can watch that link as many times as they want within that 48-hour period. So your suggestion of them making the pie, I think is really interesting, because the way that our link is set up, they could actually watch the show, watch how she makes the pie, and then make their pie, put it in the oven, and then watch the show again to really experience what she's saying and understand the layers of the pie making built in with the monologue aspect. And then it just becomes this super holistic experience for them. So I highly recommend everybody that purchases the ticket to watch it twice, so you can get the pie making tutorial and then the experience of smelling the pie baking as you're watching the play go down.
That's right. Or invite friends over, make it a pie party.
I love that idea too.
Yeah. I will say, sharing pie right out of the oven with a group of people that you've just been talking to about some pretty diverse and difficult subjects, for 75 minutes or longer, was a really interesting sort of moment of communion. It's not, you have talkbacks and you have, sort of post-show receptions and things. There's nothing like inviting someone into your house and feeding them food that they've watched you make. While you're also, like I said, talking about these really interesting characters and, our own American history and how it's told and who tells it, and sort of who's included in that narrative and who isn't. Lest people think that the show is just about food. It is totally about food, but it's also about, lots of other interesting things that give you a lot to chew on, so to speak. The other thing that I did a lot of research into, this real person named Virginia Dare, and she was the first white child born in America in one of the very early settlements from the Pilgrims coming over in the late 17th century. And what's interesting about that is, real person, she, like the rest of the Roanoke colony, absolutely disappeared from history. No one knows what happened to them, but the settlement disappeared. And over the years, that story of this little white child born in America has been changed and sort of appropriated by all of these different groups. I mean, she's been used as a symbol of, sort of white nationalism. She's been used as the sort of myth making around Thanksgiving. She's been used to sell vanilla and, all sorts of other products. She was the subject of a really, really long poem that was, again, part of that sort of weird beginning of America mythology that's grown up and that we learned in school, but maybe was, more myth than fact. And so I was just fascinated by, like I said, the evolution of the mythology around this little girl named Virginia Dare, who probably starved to death before she was 3 years old. And she's still being used today. which is so interesting as a beacon mostly of whiteness and appropriation. So that's also sort of woven into the play. And it's kind of all about what it means to be American and what assumptions you make, or assumptions that, like I said, you're taught from a really early age. This is the story of the founding of our country. This is the history, and this is the sort of manifest destiny of white people. That's a lot to put into one evening. But I swear to God, it all goes together just like pie. You got the apples, you got the cinnamon, you got the sugar, you got the crust. It all comes together.
Yeah, no, thank you for that description of it. It is, very interesting to think about, especially in this moment in time. We are, I think, as I'm going to speak from the perspective of a white woman, because I too am one, that, we see injustice, perhaps we've seen it our whole lives. We've heard the stories of the civil rights movement. We've heard these ideas that come from people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and we kind of see that as like something that's not attached to us because it's in the past. It's not taught to us as something that we're going through now. It's taught to us as something that we've already gone through. And I think that's something that really did open our eyes in regards to the Trump administration was these conversations. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement had started well before Donald Trump got elected. And as we all saw, kind of peaked in 2020. And I think that really pushed us finally into a place where we had to look at that idea of how we walk through the world and are treated in this nation in a certain way because of the color of our skin. And maybe it's that we're not treated in a certain way. Maybe it's that we get to avoid being treated in a certain way because we are seen as the same as these mythological founding fathers that were just the pride of everything that we should feel. So it is a lot to tackle.
It would be disingenuous to say that this is not a political play. It has a very specific political bent. It's very well researched, I have to say. So it's not just, someone's crazy opinion going on and on for, an hour and a half. It brings up a lot of information, a lot of things that hopefully people didn't know, new ways to look at our own history, and sort of factor some new things in. But at the end of the day, white women voted for Trump overwhelmingly twice. And it enrages me for a lot of reasons, but mostly because I believe his agenda is one that was void of empathy and compassion. And I think that that is one of the things that the main character in the show, Maggie, really understands on a much more visceral level, as she, has this friendship with a person of color, and like I said, a Muslim who is treated very differently, and has all kinds of problems with her work, with her work visa, with going through an airport security check, just with interacting day to day situations, being in a restaurant and having to ask, is there pork in this, and because she wasn't allowed to eat that, given her religious beliefs. There's just, the world is a complicated place. And I think this play, I'm trying to complicate it a little further, or at least bring up some things and tie them together so that we can really just step back maybe and take a look at the things that the beliefs that were just handed to us, and then give us all an opportunity to really evaluate, now, where is this information coming from? Why do I believe this? Why did I believe everything that I was taught in school, without questioning any of it? And you could say the same of, the news that you listen to, the newspapers you read. Why do I just believe, that the government's always acting in the best interest of all of its citizens, or, the United States is a place that is fair and everyone's equal? Uh, those are also things that we learned in school, and as you say, it's very easy to be in a bubble, to have your own sort of little life where, and I live in a very white, nice little suburb of Madison. I don't encounter a lot of, social issues, strife, people who look different from me even, on a daily basis. And I think we all need to start looking harder and thinking harder about not just our own little lives, but the lives of everyone around us, and making sure that, that at least in our sphere, that we're doing all we can to make sure people are heard, and that they're safe, and that they are not just tolerated, but welcomed into all of the places of our community.
Yeah. Yeah. And to that point, I'd even say expanding spheres, right? Like part of being a citizen of the US is being a part of this, like, it's still a mythological story of all of these cultures coming together to be this melting pot, so to speak.
Right.
But what does that actually mean, and how do we actually embrace all of us as US citizens, or just even people that, have temporary citizenship, or have,
People who live
work
here,
visas. Or people seeking refuge from the horrors of their own homes.
Much like the mythological pilgrims did when they came here.
Right. And
we are supposed to be a country filled with refugees, as well as Indigenous people, as well as people who were brought here enslaved. And we are such an amalgamation of faces and cultures and languages from around the world, and we need to recognize that and embrace it and celebrate it, instead of trying to pretend that we are a monolith. So that's easy to put on a postcard.
Yeah, right.
To a certain degree, all of my plays, are like this. It's all little pieces of things I know about, things I researched, things I've experienced. And that's the kind of place that I enjoy writing. I mean, I love history. I love going back and sort of learning about social history, just sort of the lives of everyday people during different time periods. I've written a play about the Federal Writers Project in the 30s. I wrote a play about the Dust Bowl in the Plain States, and the photographers who came out and documented that. I mean, that was super fun research. I just wrote a play actually about the vaccine debate, which isn't actually a debate, but vaccination misinformation, I should say. So I do like bringing up sort of having sort of big ideas, and often based on real people. The Virginia Dare story was one that was completely new to me. I had never heard of Virginia Dare, and had no idea how many stories she was part of in our sort of American folklore, and how many different time periods where her name was sort of a rallying cry for different causes and different groups. I actually, I get a lot of my ideas for plays from Odd News. So I'll go to like the Yahoo Odd News page, or Google Odd News, whatever. I mean, there are some fantastic things in there. When I teach playwriting, I usually have my students write a short either a scene or a 10-minute play about an odd news story, because they are so fantastic and weird. And there's always one about a snake eating somebody, or showing up in somebody's plumbing. There's a lot of snakes in the odd news category. um, and so it was actually, that's kind of how I learned about Virginia Dare. I subscribed to several sort of, did you know this sort of, email lists. And I'm pretty sure it was Atlas Obscura, which I love, which is just this sort of weekly email that talks about strange things around the country or even around the world. And I had been doing some research about apple pie, actually, and there's so much to learn about, like the beginnings of apple pie even, and pie. But yeah, I started reading about Virginia Dare, and it was this huge rabbit hole, and I kept going deeper and deeper and finding out all of these crazy cool things. When I had the reading in my house, the first time we ever heard Miss American Pie out loud, I actually bought Virginia Dare wine, which you can still buy on the internet. And the Virginia Dare winery is still around, and they'll even give you a copy of The White Doe, the story of Virginia Dare. That was written in the 19th century.
Wow.
So,
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know about promoting Virginia Dare wine. Look it up, maybe not buy it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was more of a curiosity than anything else.
So considering everything that you've said about, what the story is about and how it really tackles some difficult subject matter and conversations that we're having right now, what has been one of the most challenging aspects of either developing this or producing it in any way?
One of the most challenging things for me was cutting it down. I found so many stories that I wanted to talk about, and had so many experiences as a food reviewer, that had a lot of just a lot of funny and poignant things about ethnicity and what sort of food we're all comfortable with, and the traditions that we have around food, that we assume everybody understands or shares, and learning about foods from different cultures. I mean, I probably cut 30 pages out of my script, which
Wow.
was hard, but particularly because I was the one who was performing it initially. It was a really interesting exercise, because I was the one who had to stand up there and keep everyone's attention, which is not easy over
Right.
this longish monologue. And so that was a really interesting thing, was really trying to find the through line, and then really sort of cut everything else away so that it was sort of as concentrated as possible. And I had a fantastic director uh, um, who helped me with all of that, named Jennifer Plants. And we also had a residency at 1812 Theater in Philadelphia, and that helped a lot. The other thing is, it's sort of a truism in theater. Anything that you would sort of normally do in your normal everyday life, nothing is gonna like go wrong. You're not gonna like trip and fall on the way to go get your mail. If you try to put that on stage, suddenly everything goes wrong. I am a fantastic baker, and I can't tell you how many times the butter was the wrong temperature, and the pie crust didn't come together, or the food processor didn't work all of a sudden. Or I was rehearsing one night and I actually broke a knife.
Oh
I
my
mean, how
goodness.
does that even happen? And all I could think of was, oh my God, if that happened during a performance, that's crazy. So yeah, the more, and my director was always, she was so nervous when I was peeling apples and talking at the same time, because person in front of you got a knife and tried to do something else at the same time.
Mhm.
Um, it was really challenging to keep all of those balls in the air. Um, and I was afraid actually that the play wouldn't be relevant, after the Trump presidency was over. And I find now it's just as relevant, if not more. So, I mean, obviously our country still has a lot of issues
Mhm.
that we need to work out about race and nationalism and sort of who gets to say that they're American and who is welcome here. And I'm happy about that. I'm happy that the play gets to have hopefully a longer life. And I'd love to see it done in all kinds of variations, you know, in people's houses, on a big stage, you know, where you're really baking a pie, where you're not really baking a pie, you know, just all sorts of experiments to see how the audience reacts, you know, whether, you know, being in a really intimate space, talking to a group of 20 people at a time, is that the way to sort of reach into somebody's heart and mind and get them to listen to hard things? Or, could it be bigger? This is actually the second production that's going to be online. And so I'm super interested in how this production turns out. Obviously, and I have every confidence it's going to be sensational, since I've been talking to you guys since the beginning. But it's also a funny thing for me, sort of letting go of the script. It's always a funny thing as a playwright, letting go of the script and letting other people take your baby and, do their own thing with it. It's particularly interesting since I was also the one who was interpreting all of these lines that I wrote, and to see other actresses. And nothing makes me happier than to see other actresses come into that character and find new things and just sort of make it their own. And like I said, I'm super interested in how your actress is going to figure out who Maggie is and bring that to life. So I'm very excited. Plus, little bonus for me, my whole family gets to see the show now.
Yay. Yes, that
I
is.
was all set to come down to Arizona, to see it, because, it's pretty exciting for me. But now I get to send the link to my friends all over the country, and hopefully we'll all sit down with our pieces of pie and get to watch. So.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I think that is one of the best things to come out of the online theater experience, is that especially as producers, Winding Road gets to gift the playwrights and their communities and their friends and family the experience of the work that they're doing. Before it was just like, well, you're not close enough. Well, you're not spending $400 on a plane ticket to go to Tucson, so I guess you won't be seeing your show. It's its own challenge, but yeah, we are excited to get to share this piece with you and your family and your extended networks as well. So is there anything else that you're working on now, or that you've had in process recently that you'd like to just
actually
shout out to?
I am working on a pretty small ensemble piece. So Frank Lloyd Wright is a name that you should recognize, being in Arizona, because Taliesin West is right there.
Yep.
Taliesin is right in my neighborhood in Spring Green, which is about 40 minutes away from my house. As just sort of a summer job last year, I worked as a tour guide at Taliesin and learned all about Frank Lloyd Wright and all about the house. And I got to talk to people from all over the country. It was so interesting. Sort of about halfway through the season, I thought, oh, I think I'm going to be writing a play about Mr. Rice. So I'm working on a show that's going to be almost in real time, about a train journey that Frank Lloyd Wright and Edwin Cheney take from Chicago to Spring Green on the night when Taliesin burned down. So both of these men were in Chicago. They found out that Taliesin in Wisconsin was on fire. They got on the train. It was a local train. And so the train stopped every 3.5 minutes. And it took them just hours and hours and hours to get back to Spring Green. And what they would find there eventually in August of 1914 was that Mama, the woman that they both loved, had been murdered along with her children and several other workmen. It's a big big story at Taliesin. So yeah, so I'm going to talk about the play is about what happens on the train as they're journeying towards the unknown. And so it's exciting. Like I said, I love history. I love, going into other eras, and I love the sort of framework of a real person, but then being able to sort of play and say, well, what happened in this little sphere of time that nobody's sort of ever written down. I think I can imagine that.
Yeah, well, definitely send it our way and let us give
For
it
sure.
a look-see when you finish it up.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
awesome. So final shout out to you. Where can people find more information about Miss American Pie or any of your other works that are available?
I have a website. It's gwendolynrice.com. And it lists quite a few of my plays. There's also a section about 10-minute plays. And then, as I said, I'm a theater reviewer, so it also has like all of my recent reviews from things that I've seen in New York, in Chicago, in Madison, Milwaukee. This
Meow.
is my cat Tango. Yeah. Yeah. Um, yes, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook. There aren't that many Gwendolyn Rices in the world, so if you just Google me, you'll probably end up with me.
Awesome. Well, thank you
So
so much for taking some time to talk a little bit about your show and about you. Just a fun fact for our audiences as well, we will be putting a copy of the pie recipe on our website so that people can
good.
access it before the show, so that you'll be able to pre-make your pie that you can then pop in the oven at the top of the show and have that sensory experience that is intended.
There are also a couple of pie making tutorials on YouTube, which I believe I linked for you and for your actress.
Oh, perfect.
So you could see, sort of how I make pie. So if anybody's really, really dying to see, the Gwen Rice technique, yeah, it's out there on social
Awesome.
media.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much. And thank you to our audiences for continuing to support Winding Road Theater Ensemble. And we hope to see you on the interwebs.
Thank you.